For as long as he could remember, the walls of the orphanage were all Leo had known, a place he shared with his little sister Emily. But there was something else, a hazy vision of a grand home with beautiful paintings and the soft notes of a piano echoing in his dreams. The image would fade as he woke, but the memory lingered, vivid yet fleeting. Whenever he shared this dream with the caregivers, they would chuckle gently, dismissing it as a child's fantasy. "Orphans like you don't come from such luxurious homes," they would say, shaking their heads. "It's just a dream, Leo. Children from wealthy families don't end up here. They're always cared for and never left alone." Leo would only sigh when he heard this, but he couldn't shake the image. That bright, elegant house remained lodged in his memory. One other thing set Leo apart from other children at the orphanage. He had come there holding a black violin case so tightly that the caregivers could hardly pry it from his grasp. It was as if he feared that letting go would break the last fragile thread connecting him to his past. The violin itself was simple, nothing remarkable, but to Leo, it was precious beyond words. The orphanage workers had tried, without success, to find any clues about Leo's past or family. When Leo and Emily had first arrived, they were disheveled, covered in scratches and dirt, their expressions carrying an unspoken sadness. The caregivers could only imagine what hardships they'd been through before finding refuge at the orphanage. When Leo, only 6, first arrived, he was so filled with fear that he clung to his room like a sanctuary, watching the world with wide, uncertain eyes, and never letting his violin out of his sight. He spent hours sitting by the window, staring out with a quiet hope, as if he expected someone to come and take him and Emily home. Yet when asked about his parents, Leo could only shrug or shake his head, unsure of what to say. One caregiver, who was especially fond of Leo, once asked, "Did your parents hurt you, Leo?" Leo looked down, then slowly shook his head, unable to find the words. "Then, where did you get these bruises?" she asked gently, hoping he would open up. But Leo only gave a small shrug, his lips pressed together as if even the memory was locked away. No one knew if he had truly forgotten or simply didn't want to talk. Whatever it was, it seemed as though he had buried the past deep within himself, too painful or mysterious to bring to light. Emily, who was only 4, was also quiet and withdrawn. She spent most of her time asleep, and when she was awake, she clung to her brother, refusing to let anyone else get close. Leo would feed her with a spoon, whispering stories in her ear, tales he'd heard from somewhere he couldn't recall, maybe even from their parents. Months passed in this way, with Leo and Emily finding small comforts in each other. Despite the passing of time, the caregivers slowly began to accept that no one would come looking for them. Leo became a familiar presence around the orphanage, especially in the evenings, when he would take out his violin and play soft, sorrowful melodies. His music was far beyond what anyone would expect from such a young child, each note tugging at the heartstrings of the caregivers who listened. One woman, Laura, his favorite caregiver, often asked him, "Who taught you to play so beautifully, Leo?" "I don't remember," Leo would answer, and he meant it. He truly had no memory of learning to play. It was as if the music had always been there, waiting to flow from his fingertips. For Leo, playing the violin brought a rare sense of peace, a way to escape the haze of forgotten memories and soothe the hidden pain in his heart. As time passed, Leo and Emily gradually adjusted to life at the orphanage, though it wasn't without its hardships. Leo's quiet and sensitive nature often made him a target for teasing from the other kids, who called him the sweet boy and envied him for the way the caregivers seemed to favor him. Occasionally, the other boys would corner him, their taunts growing sharper, intending to intimidate him. Yet they rarely resorted to hitting him. Somehow, Leo's calm composure made them uneasy, and they'd back off when the caregivers were near. But one day, things went too far. A few boys decided to take something precious from him, his violin. They hid it as a prank, thinking it would be funny to see Leo finally lose his cool. And this time, he did. When Leo couldn't find his violin, it was as if the last thread connecting him to something precious had snapped. Panic turned to rage, a fierce, wild fire that he'd never known, bursting from his chest with a force that left the other kids frozen in shock. Without thinking, he lashed out, throwing pillows and chairs, stomping his feet, and yelling louder than anyone had ever heard. The other kids scattered, frightened by his unexpected fury, while the orphanage staff rushed in, shocked at the scene. Finally, Leo shouted, "Give me back my violin!" At that moment, the caregivers understood what had happened. Laura, the caregiver who understood Leo best, stayed with him, soothing him, while the other staff searched for the boys responsible. The culprits were found and sternly scolded, and the violin was swiftly returned to its rightful owner. Trembling, Leo clutched it to his chest, feeling as though he'd almost lost the last piece of his heart. After that day, no one dared to touch Leo's violin again. Life at the orphanage settled into a calm routine, though Emily, who lived separately in the girls' room, still often faced her own share of teasing. Her appearance and gentle nature made her a target for other girls, and Leo would always comfort her, even though he didn't agree with her secret desire to leave the orphanage. "Out there, we're just kids, Emily. Nobody would care for us like they do here," he would say, trying to be rational. "But that's still 8 whole years until you're old enough." Emily would protest, tears brimming in her eyes. Leo would gently stroke her hair and reassure her, "Maybe someone nice will adopt you, Emily. Someone who will care for you." "And leave you behind?" she would ask, her voice trembling. Leo would sigh and pull her into a hug, saying softly, "I want our real parents to come for us too, Emily. But I don't think that will happen." Though he didn't know why, Leo had a sense of finality, a quiet certainty that he and Emily were on their own. As the years passed, Emily's isolation grew harder to bear. She became more withdrawn, struggling to fit in with the other girls, who laughed at her curly hair, freckles, and slender frame. She often cried alone, finding comfort only in her brother and her favorite toy, a small stuffed rabbit. Leo could see her suffering, but he felt helpless, caught between his own struggles and his love for his sister. Then, one early morning, Emily's dormmates played a cruel prank. They opened a window, stripped off her blanket, and tied her to her bed using sheets, leaving her exposed to the cold. Emily awoke shivering and struggling to free herself, but the knots were tied too tightly. By the time she was discovered, Emily had already developed a severe cold. The caregivers, initially dismissive of her symptoms, simply gave her herbal teas and isolated her from the other children. But as the days passed, her condition worsened. Laura, the first to notice her decline, finally insisted that a doctor be called. Emily was diagnosed with pneumonia, her weakened state exacerbated by the stress she'd endured. Hearing this, Leo was filled with a sense of desperation. He couldn't imagine life without his sister, the only family he had in the world. But when he learned that her treatment would require money the orphanage didn't have, he felt utterly lost. How could he, just a child himself, possibly help? With a heavy heart, Leo sat by the window, clutching his violin. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, and suddenly an idea struck him. The violin. He could use his music to help Emily. Determined, Leo rushed to find Laura, explaining his plan with fervor. Laura listened thoughtfully, then nodded, though she looked at him with concern. "Are you sure, Leo? It will be hard with so many people watching." Leo nodded, his voice steady. "I'll try. It's better than doing nothing." Early the next morning, Laura and Leo stood at the orphanage's exit, dressed and ready. Leo wore his best white shirt and black trousers with suspenders, clutching his violin case tightly in his hands. Laura adjusted her hat and asked, "Are you ready, Leo?" Leo gave a resolute nod. Together, they set off for the nearby train station, the closest place where a crowd might gather. On the way, Laura shared stories about her own childhood in an orphanage, a revelation that surprised Leo. He hadn't known that Laura, too, had grown up without a family. "It's a shame I was born so late," he said wistfully. "I would have adopted you." Laura laughed, touched by his words. "I would gladly have been your sister," she replied. But life had other plans. Finally, they reached the station. Laura found a good spot near the busy central square and gave Leo an encouraging nod. With a deep breath, he opened his violin case, took out his cherished instrument, and began to play. The gentle, soulful melody filled the square, soft and captivating. Passersby slowed, some stopping to listen, mesmerized by the unexpected beauty of the music. Laura walked around with a hat, collecting coins and bills from those who felt moved to give. Over the course of an hour and a half, the hat gradually filled, and Leo's fingers began to grow tired, though his heart swelled with hope. Finally, Laura signaled to him that it was time to wrap up. Leo decided to play one last piece, his favorite melody, a quiet, haunting tune that seemed to linger in the air long after the notes had faded. He closed his eyes, playing with every ounce of feeling he had. As he lowered his violin, Leo looked up to see a tall, dark-haired man standing nearby, his gaze piercing and unyielding, as if he saw something in Leo that even the boy himself couldn't understand. The man looked around 45, with a serious, stern expression, tan skin, and a silver-streaked beard. His piercing gaze was fixed on Leo, and his brow furrowed as though something about the boy disturbed him. As Leo looked up at him, the man suddenly asked, "Where did you learn that melody? Who taught you to play it?" Leo was taken aback, nervous under the intensity of the stranger's gaze. The question struck a chord within him, but he had no answer. Stammering, he said, I don't remember." Finally, the day of the talent competition arrived. Leo and Celia dressed in their best clothes, Leo in a crisp white shirt with a bow tie, and Celia in a stunning white dress with silver accents that shimmered in the light. When Leo saw her, he was momentarily speechless. "You look beautiful," he whispered, and Celia blushed, glancing away shyly. At the competition venue, Leo and Celia waited backstage, their nerves building as they listened to the performances of other contestants. When their names were called, Leo took Celia's hand, sensing her nervousness, and gave it a reassuring squeeze. She looked at him gratefully, and together they stepped onto the stage. Under the bright lights, Leo began to play his violin, the familiar melody filling the hall. Celia joined in on the piano, her fingers dancing over the keys in perfect harmony with Leo's notes. The music enveloped the audience, transporting them into a world of beauty and emotion. Leo closed his eyes, letting the music guide him, completely absorbed in the performance. But suddenly, he felt a small jolt in the melody, something out of place. Confused, he glanced at Celia and noticed that she had made a mistake, her fingers hitting the wrong notes. Another mistake followed, jarring the harmony between them. Leo continued playing, hoping she would regain her composure, but he could see the panic in her eyes. They managed to finish the piece, and although there was applause, it wasn't the thunderous ovation they had hoped for. Leo took Celia's hand and led her off the stage. She was visibly upset, her head hanging low as tears filled her eyes. "It's okay, Celia," he whispered, trying to comfort her. "Everyone makes mistakes." She nodded, but her disappointment was evident. "Please, let's just go home," she said quietly. After they returned to the lobby, Leo asked, "Don't you want to stay and see the results?" But Celia only shook her head, too ashamed to stay. Taking her hand, Leo led her to the exit, where Matteo was waiting. When he saw them approaching, his expression darkened, and Celia's shoulders tensed, bracing for his reaction. "What happened, Celia?" Matteo asked, his voice stern. Celia looked down, unable to meet his gaze. Leo, sensing her distress, stepped in, saying, "She just made a small mistake. It happens." But Matteo was not satisfied. "I expected more from you, Celia. We practiced every night. There was no excuse for that performance." Celia's face turned pale, and she looked away, hurt by her father's words. The drive home was silent, filled with an unspoken tension. Once they arrived, Celia immediately retreated to her room, and from that day forward, something changed in her. Matteo began focusing his music lessons solely on Leo, while Celia's piano remained untouched. At meals, Matteo barely acknowledged Celia's presence, speaking only to Leo and Emily. Celia became more withdrawn, retreating to her room for most of the day. Leo noticed her absence keenly and felt worried, but he didn't know how to help her. Then, one early morning, Leo was awakened by a loud commotion. He rushed out of his room and heard Marta's panicked voice shouting, "Celia is gone." Without thinking, Leo ran to the garden, somehow sensing where she might be. He headed toward the pond where they had spent time together, and as he neared, he heard soft splashes. His heart racing, he sprinted to the water's edge, just in time to see a flash of chestnut hair breaking the surface. Without hesitation, Leo dove into the water. Though he didn't know if he could swim, his only thought was to save her. Reaching Celia, he wrapped his arms around her waist and struggled to bring her to the surface. Adults rushed to help, pulling them both out of the pond. They laid Celia gently on the grass, where she coughed and gasped for air. Matteo knelt beside his daughter, his face etched with worry and guilt. "I'm so sorry, Celia," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I let you down. I didn't mean to push you so hard." Celia looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and relief. Slowly, she nodded, forgiving him in silence. Leo watched this exchange, hoping that their family could finally begin to heal. In the days that followed, Celia's spirit began to recover, and she once again took her place at the piano. This time, Leo knew she would play for herself, free of expectations, and he silently vowed to support her in every way he could. As life in Matteo's mansion gradually returned to normal, Leo found himself haunted by a lingering question. Who were his and Emily's real parents, and what had happened to them? One evening, gathering his courage, he approached Matteo, who was reading quietly in the living room. "Mr. Valdez," Leo began hesitantly, "I need to know about my past. I have a feeling you know something." Matteo looked up from his book, his expression softening. "Yes, Leo," he said with a heavy sigh, "I do know something, but it's a painful story." Leo nodded, his heart pounding. "I'm ready to hear it." Matteo put down his book and removed his glasses, a distant look in his eyes. "Your mother? Her name was Carmen. She was one of my first students. I fell in love with her from the moment I met her. She had a grace and beauty that captivated everyone, and she played the violin like no one else. Her talent was extraordinary, and I was honored to be her teacher." Matteo's voice trembled as he continued, lost in his memories. "We spent a lot of time together, and I dreamed of a future with her. But then she met your father, a kind, wealthy patron of the arts. He loved music, and he fell in love with Carmen just as deeply as I had. I could see that she was truly happy with him, so I stepped aside." Leo listened intently, feeling as if a door to his past was slowly opening. "Your parents married and built a beautiful life together. They lived in a grand house. Yes, the one you remember. It was real, Leo. Your memories weren't just dreams. They had you first, and then your sister, Emily. Your mother started teaching you the violin when you were only 3. She was patient and loving, and music became a bond between you." Matteo paused, his face clouding with sorrow. But then, tragedy struck. One day while traveling, there was a terrible car accident. Your parents didn't survive. Miraculously, you and Emily were found outside the wreck, bruised but alive. The trauma must have been so severe that you forgot everything. Leo felt a tear roll down his cheek, and Matteo reached out, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I searched for you for years, Leo. I was heartbroken when I lost Carmen, and when I heard that you and Emily had gone missing, it was like losing her all over again." Leo's voice quivered as he asked, "So, you recognized me because of the melody I played at the station?" "Yes," Matteo replied softly, his eyes misty. "Your mother composed that melody. It was the song she wrote when she fell in love with your father. When I heard it, I knew it could only be you." They sat in silence for a moment, and then Matteo gently pulled Leo into an embrace. "I wanted to protect you, Leo, and give you a chance to heal. I didn't tell you sooner because I feared reopening the wounds." Leo, now overwhelmed with emotions, simply nodded, grateful for the truth, even though it brought heartache. After that night, the atmosphere in Matteo's home changed. A new warmth filled the house as Matteo, Leo, Emily, and Celia grew closer, supporting each other as a family. Evenings were spent together, sharing stories, playing board games, or reading books aloud. Leo and Celia, now more like siblings than ever, often played music for everyone, their duet filling the house with harmony and joy. With Matteo's encouragement, Leo and Celia began preparing to enter the city's prestigious music academy. Both had talent, and Matteo believed they could achieve their dreams. Leo's heart swelled with hope at the prospect of studying music professionally, and Celia shared his excitement. When they turned 16, both were accepted into the academy, becoming some of its youngest students. People thought they were siblings, but as they grew closer, a different bond developed between them. Leo found himself caring for Celia in a way that went beyond friendship, and she seemed to feel the same. They supported each other through every challenge, and when Leo struggled, Celia was always there to help him. After graduating from the academy, both were offered positions in the academy orchestra, fulfilling their dreams of becoming professional musicians. Around this time, Leo proposed to Celia, and they soon married in a beautiful ceremony. Celia looked radiant as a bride, her eyes sparkling with happiness, and Leo felt that his life was finally complete. They traveled together for performances, never tiring of each other's company. Their love deepened over the years, and 2 years after their wedding, Celia gave birth to a son. They named him Leo Jr., and from the moment he was born, it was clear that music was in his blood. His slender, delicate fingers hinted that one day he might play an instrument just as beautifully as his parents. As they looked at their son, Leo and Celia felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them together. Despite the pain and loss of the past, they had found family, love, and a future they never could have imagined. Thank you for being part of our journey on Echoes of Empathy. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps us continue bringing stories that celebrate the power of compassion and connection. And even in the face of challenges, life often unfolds unexpected moments of hope and renewal. Thank you for watching, and until we meet again, stay inspired, spread kindness, and treasure the bonds that make life truly meaningful.